So today I have with me my dear friend, Erika Washington, who I am having discuss the topic of waiting on a new stage in life. And I came about interviewing her for this because she recently wrote a book called Prescription for Waiting. And she talks about coming to a crossroads in her life and how God has worked in her life. She's going to tell us about that in the interview. But she candidly deals with facing the unknown. And we're going to apply it to lots of things. Unknown future, not knowing if you're single, not knowing if you're going to get married, if you're divorced, not knowing what your future holds now, if you're widowed, not knowing what your future holds. But actually, I want to say this. I was surprised reading this. I thought, I'm supporting Erika. I can't wait to read what she wrote in the book. But because
That's fine, Anna. If you're watching on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you are listening on the podcast, please like and follow. We would love for you to do that now to help our channel grow and become a blessing to us.
It's based upon your study of love, which we'll talk about. I feel like every married person could read this and just go through and evaluate if they're loving each other like what you found in the love study. So I think this book is for everybody out there. So let's start with, Erika, what happened in your life that you came to the place that you were even writing this book?
Okay. So we'll go back to 2016. At that time in my life, I was starting to experience some emotions, some feelings, some things that just didn't match what I thought my life looked like.
Okay.
At least to the outside or on paper. I was post-divorce. I was very happy with my job. I was traveling a lot with friends. I had a new kitten.
Erika loves cats.
Erika loves cats. And, things were just going well. But there were days where I would just be sad, and I didn't know why. And then I would have these little emotional breakdowns. I had one in Kroger's where I just cried through the store, and it just didn't make sense to me. I was like, I don't understand. I don't have anything to be sad about. So during my divorce, I had gone to therapy, and I scheduled a check-in, because after I had kind of stopped going weekly, I do check-ins.
Sure.
And I tried to explain to her this emotional roller coaster, because I said that's what it feels like. I mean, I'll go long periods of time and everything's great, and then, like I said, I cried in Kroger's. But so, I'm explaining it to her, and she says, "Do you remember the grief stages?" And I said, "Of course, I remember the grief stages," because she had this, little banner in her office. And I said, "But no. I wanted to defend myself, because I said I have done the grief.
Right.
I have gone through all of those stages." I said, I went through most of them more than once. And I said, while, she and I had talked about how you don't ever get over grief, but you learn to live with it, you accept the change, and you're able to move on with life. I said, I am happier now than I was before. I'm a different person. I like this person better.
Right.
I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry about the divorce. I was just moving on. And she said, "Well, I don't think it's about the divorce either."
Wow.
And so, I was just like, okay, where's she going here?
What is it?
It was just perplexing. And she said, let's talk about some of the things that you wanted from childhood. And she said, people have different hopes and dreams. Some people, to be honest, when I was a kid, I did. I wanted to move across the country, and I did. I moved to California. But different people pursue different things. Mm-hmm. Some people want family, they want that career. They chase these things, or they plan and prepare their entire lives. And then something happens and eliminates that opportunity.
Okay.
And so she said, I think that's what you're realizing, is that most of these things you have the house, you've had the marriage, but what do you want next? I was almost 40. So the likelihood of a family and children, that's not going to happen. I wasn't dating anyone. I didn't have a boyfriend. There was no wedding plan. There was nothing. I just kind of saw a blank future.
Right.
And so, I kind of agreed with her, but I didn't want to go through grief again. I just didn't want to go through the work.
It's hard. Grief is hard on you.
It took me a couple months, And I realized that, okay, I do. If I'm going to move on and not have these breakdowns, I need to be able to look at it differently.
Okay.
To look at grieving something I may never have. And then for me, which I called waiting, for me is, what do I do while I'm waiting? Okay. Because I may be waiting to get married again someday, or I may be waiting to never get married again.
Okay.
So what do I do between now and then?
Good question.
And I'm a little OCD and I plan out everything. I admit that.
I'm with you.
So I was just like, I have to find an answer to this. And so I started working through kind of the stages, and I'm sure it was the Holy Spirit, but I kept thinking about that love study that we'll talk about.
Okay.
I kept thinking about it, and I thought one of two things. It either has some answers for me, or it's going to distract me.
Okay. Either way,
it's something to do. So I pulled out the love study, and it was right before my 40th birthday. And I started reading it, and I thought, I'm going to just type along with it. Because it was typed as well. But I just started typing as I was doing the study, all of my thoughts and feelings as I was going through it, how it related to the past, how it related to the future. And then I started putting in there, I had seen where some of the things as I went through the grief from the divorce, progress. So I put those things in there.
Okay.
But then I also found a lot of things that I had to work on. But I put it all on paper. And, as I say, the rest is history. 7 years later, I had the manuscript. I don't know when it turned in from just Erika typing to a manuscript.
Here comes a book.
Yeah. Somewhere during that time, I started to organize things a little bit better. But in the beginning, it was just me, just kind of like therapy on.
So many people say write. In fact, I dread writing so badly that's how the podcast and the YouTube channel were born, is I thought, well, I could just speak it,
Mm-hmm.
But in so many of the videos that I've even already done, people say, write your thoughts down or journal. And fortunately for us, you did, because this book was born out of it. So, all right. So you mentioned patient, facts, and history. Now, I love the theme, the prescription for waiting, and then everything matches in all the chapter titles. It's so much fun the way it's so well written. But you have patient, facts, and history. So tell us about that. Your facts and history and the challenge of the love study.
Yeah. So it was February 2013. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I got the impression at that time, Pastor Don was my pastor, and he just seemed to love Valentine's Day.
Yes.
And I just remember he always reminded the men, Valentine's Day is coming.
Don't forget.
So he was doing his, annual reminder, but that year he did a couple of different messages, and I don't remember if it was Sunday or Wednesdays, but he did on love. And during one of those, he said, I challenge you to do a study on the word love. And, I thought, okay, I'll do this. I thought it was just going to be me looking up the verses and just reading them. I didn't think it would turn into anything whatsoever. And I'll be honest, my view on love, it really was not good at that time. Okay. I mean, even though I was married, and don't get me wrong, I have loving parents and a family and everything. My view was not the same on love as what I've learned is biblical love.
Okay.
And so I just kind of got engulfed in that study. I just really enjoyed it. And I would take passages and not just read the verse, but, read around it. And then I would do commentaries. And it just became what I did for the next year. That was my Bible study.
Wow.
And, it changed the way I interacted and viewed other people.
Okay.
Not just at that time, my ex-husband, but also like coworkers, and I learned that if you approach people at work from a standpoint of love instead of I'm your boss, it changes things.
Good viewpoint.
So it went well beyond what I thought the study was going to be.
So the love study would be tested. What happened in your life to test that?
So I started it in 2013 and pretty much went into 2014. Then in 2014 is what I call the biggest trial of my life thus far. I'm not going to say ever, but thus far. And it did ultimately result in a divorce.
Okay.
It was a very difficult year in which I was extremely depressed. And I just, I had this new outlook on love, but I feel like it was a test because I wanted to keep that outlook, but I was now experiencing, a divorce and all of that comes with it. And so it just really tested, which is always happens, when you feel like you have learned something, you have changed, and you're trying to work to incorporate that into your life. And now my world has fallen apart, and I just have to kind of figure out what to do next.
Wow. You said all you could do was go back through the love study after your world was turned upside down. Tell me about that. I'm amazed that you even were drawn to go back to it at such a hard time. I think I would, I don't know about me, but in general, it seems like it would be a temptation to just say, I'm not going back to that. So it's amazing to me that you went back to that.
And I think I was very depressed, and I just didn't, because typically when I try to do my Bible study, I knew as a Christian I need to be doing Bible study.
Right.
But I just couldn't pick up something and read and focus. I mean, I just couldn't focus on anything. Everything was in small increments. And if anybody's dealt with depression, they know that everybody experiences a little differently, but sometimes you just have to take a few minutes at a time, this hour, the next hour,
Right.
And so it was very easy because I had it printed out, and I just would pick it up, and it seemed like every time that I picked up that love study and started reading, I got some sort of hope, some sort of encouragement for that day.
That's
I
great.
could get through that next hour, and it was, so I just kept using it. I just kept reading it over and over. I didn't read every 40 pages every day, but I just kept reading it over and over and over.
And just turning back to that.
Yeah, and it just gave me that hope that I needed to keep going each day.
I think it's important to mention here too what a word study can do, because I know a lot of times we can just read passage after passage in the Bible, but a word study, whether you do it with the help of a book where somebody's already gathered the information, or whether you're digging and writing it all out like you're doing, which I think is probably the absolute most helpful, but it's so helpful to take a topic and just really put all the verses in one spot, like you said, where I could just look at everything in one spot.
Because sometimes you're looking for a verse, and I know at that time I would think, there's something I need to read, and you can't remember where it is. I can Google it, and I can't quite get it right, and I can't find it in my Bible, but it was on that 40 pages.
40 pages. That motivates me to want to do that. 40 pages.
I definitely like to type it all out.
Wow. All right, so you start out addressing, I think it's chapter 1. Let me make sure it's actually chapter titles. Active ingredient, waiting. There's a grief that comes from your life not turning out the way you thought it would, which obviously was what you dealt with your therapist. So how does that relate to waiting? How did that relate to waiting?
So I think that, when you go through some kind of life event like this, or something similar, there's a lot of action taking place, because you got to pick up the pieces. You are now, some people have to move. They have to do a lot of different things, like what I call day-to-day things. So there's a lot of activity on that side. It's kind of when things quiet down,
Sure.
that you feel like, okay, well, I have this shattered life that I'm putting back together, but what am I putting back together?
Okay.
For me, there
Sure.
was no fiance waiting at the door.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, there's an element of waiting. There's a busyness, but then there's the waiting. And I think that is what, when I realized that I might be waiting for something that may never happen again, then that just caused me, that's what brought on the sadness and those,
what do I do
difficult days.
during this time?
And so I was like, okay, well, I have got to figure out what to do while I wait. You can't just sit at home.
No, you can't. And I don't have this for every chapter, but this particular chapter, I have to move a contact to see straight here with my eyes. I love some of the things that you said. In your case, you were talking about after divorce and waiting, is God going to bring someone else into your life, was one of the things you were addressing. And I think that the things you say in this first paragraph are so important for the everyday person that walks up and just tries to give you advice. And like you said, a lot of times it's a married person, and they say, wait, and when you least expect it, he'll appear. I laugh so hard at that. And you're like, hello, people, I'm not looking for Casper, and I don't want to wait. And then they say, oh, just fall in love with God, pray, don't waste your time dating losers. And you're saying, like, I hadn't thought of that really already. And then you say, I loathe this one, date just for fun. Oh my goodness. And you say, unless you're a teenager, what? And you're so right. I mean, as an adult, what is the purpose of dating? And if you're not into the club scene and that kind of lifestyle, dating over and over and over is just...
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. That's what you said in the book. So anyway, I say that here to say that one of the things I love about the way you wrote your book is that it's just so transparent about how you feel, and yet you're kind of like, let's figure it out and keep going. You're not playing a victim, which I think is so important. Anyway, I highlighted those things under there because I got the best kick out of that. And I also thought, people need to know, saying these trite little things to people who are going through big life changes, it may be better to not say anything than to say something like that at that time.
One of the things that bothered me most when I was going through my divorce was when people would say bad things about my ex-husband.
Okay.
And I am grieving. I am dealing with something very difficult here. That didn't help me at all.
No. Like that makes it okay that you're going through this.
And
because,
I know they're trying to make me feel better, but what it taught me was to listen to whoever that person is, because you don't want to hurt them more. I made the choice of that marriage, so, it was one of those things that I've just learned that, I need to watch what I say when I'm having or trying to, give somebody advice. And sometimes maybe I just need to listen.
Good point. Excellent point. So in the next chapter, you talk about self-awareness. How is that painful or uncomfortable?
So at least for me, and I think most people's like this, we don't like to have our weaknesses pointed out. We hate that question in an interview. So, we all have our shortcomings and our flaws and things. And, we don't necessarily want to work on them.
Right.
But I think, at least for me, especially going through a big event and noticing that during that, some of my weaknesses were kind of highlighting, or I don't know, just came out even more.
Okay.
I felt like that's a good time to kind of self-evaluate yourself and say, what can I work on? What can I do differently? And that may help me in future relationships. And it may not be a romantic relationship. It may be a, working, because mine was trust. I admit I have trust issues. Okay. I've always had them, and a lot of people say they trust until someone gives them a reason not to. I was the opposite. Okay. You had to give me a reason to trust you. I would test you. And so it was something where I said, okay, that, and going through a divorce, trust is, broken.
It's broken.
So I realized that was really going to deteriorate. That was going to be a bigger problem for me than it already was. And I had to decide, and I looked at my own self and I said, do I want to be constantly proving myself to others? Do I want people not to trust me? Right. And so when I flipped that around and looked at myself, then I realized I need to treat people differently. Now, I'm not going to say it's easy. And, I still have to make a daily decision to say, okay, I'm going to trust the people at work. I'm going to trust the people in my life. Because if I see a red flag, I immediately, the walls want to come up. And, but I just, it's been very helpful, though, because it's a weakness I could have just,
So this is just me.
This is just me. I'll build bigger walls, you know. But that's a hard way to live too. So.
And yet, in 1 Corinthians, you know, one of the love chapter, one of the things it talks about is that you think the best about people instead of the worst about people immediately. So yeah. So how is taking this waiting one day at a time? You talk about. I mean, how is that important to take it one day at a time?
I think because it can be so overwhelming. After you have a big life-changing event, there's a lot to do. You're focused on those types of things. If you are doing some self-evaluation, what can I learn? What can I do different? You're working on yourself. You have other responsibilities. Some people may have kids or you know, aging parents, whatever it is. You have all these things. And if you just kind of look at everything all the time, it's overwhelming.
Yes, I agree.
You think that there's no hope at the end.
Right.
And I'm, like I said, I'm a planner. So I am a long-term planner. So, you know, going to a one-day focus is, and it was hard for me, but it helped me to accomplish more and just to really set, okay, you know, this is what I'm going to do today. And I always say, you know, I put God first. You know, I have a much better day if I do my Bible study and pray in the morning.
Okay.
I'm not going to say it always happens.
Right.
You know, life happens.
Right.
But, you know, I feel like I always try to say God is my number one priority, but you back that up with action and actually do something.
Yes.
And then fill in with the other responsibilities that you have. And then allow some time for you to work on the things that you wanted to work on if you did that self-evaluation. Because nobody's holding you accountable. It's up to you to do it.
Good point. Good point.
And that just, you know, again, if you do it one day at a time, it's a lot easier to feel like you've accomplished something than if you're just kind of looking at all the things.
Everything you realized and put it all into one. Yeah, I agree.
Because there's no guarantee that another life event is not going to happen, you know.
True.
And you have even more to deal with. It seems to compound.
That's great advice. Great advice. So as you continue this study, the love study, you talk about consulting God. Would you tell us some of your you had great reminders in that chapter. So what are some of the reminders about making sure we consult with God?
So obviously we don't know what, you know, the next day holds. Really even our next hour. I mean, anything can happen. But I think it's just important. I mean, God gives us the ability to plan and prepare and, you know, He gives us goals and desires and all these things. I just think it's important to include Him.
Exactly.
You know, I kind of joke sometimes, I pray about everything. I mean, you know, and I like sometimes think, is it really even appropriate to be telling God all of this stuff, you know? But
He wants to know it all. He wants to hear it all.
He knows it all anyway.
Yes.
So I tell it all. Because I feel like, you know, if He already knows it, I might as well talk to Him about it.
True.
So, you know, to me, that's definitely an important reminder. Pray about everything. Ask for wisdom. You know, I mean, sometimes after somebody's dealing with a big event, they have to make some career changes or a move or different things like that. You know, I've always prayed, you know, when I sold my house, you know, I prayed about the timing of that, and it didn't work out the first time I wanted to. I didn't understand, but I just kept praying.
Good for you.
You know, let's see what else. Put God first always. And, you know, as far as like, you know, service, and sometimes if you're dealing with depression, you don't feel like being around a lot of people. But it's worth it, you know. And, you know, sometimes even, you know, going to church, maybe you can just make it there.
Right.
But if you can serve, then it'll take your mind off of things. I mean, it did me. I mean, I work in the kids, you know, the different ministries we've had.
Right. And
it just always seemed like it takes my mind away from everything else, and kids are just so amazing and innocent, and just they really help me.
Well, and you help them. I know they love Miss Erika when they talk about you at church. And you also talk about maybe using that time to research, and you also mentioned forgiveness. I'd like to hear about that.
And so research, that was, and that actually I did a little, when I got tired of online dating, I used it for research. I would poll some of the questions, some of the things that I learned from the 5 Love Languages book. I would ask those in questions to see how the guys responded.
Wow.
And so that's why I tell people. I'm like, okay, if you are looking to get married, or some people maybe they haven't been married and they're in their 40s, look at what the Bible says about marriage and love and respect, and just kind of do a Bible study on it, and then practice what you are hoping and what you are praying and waiting for. Same thing with forgiveness. I think that's an area, you would think with my trust issues I would have trouble with forgiveness, but I don't. Okay. That is one where it's been easier for me, but I know a lot of people struggle with that.
Sure.
They've been hurt and it's hard to forgive that person, but it's such that's a very heavy weight to carry around.
It is. It is.
I think, do a Bible study on forgiveness and then practice it. That's what I always say. Practice, study it and then put it into practice,
Which I love that about your book. You're very just forthright and kind of like, this is what we do, and just get to it. Let's not make excuses. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier, not become the victim. I won't give away the whole book, but I appreciate you dealing with a victim attitude. You warn about taking things into your own hands, staying away from bitterness and such, and you have just like a no-nonsense attitude toward doing well, even in hardship. Like, let's just do right, let's do well, let's grow, let's get closer to God. So tell me how, you can tell, I say this even about grief, I want to not just survive it. I want to thrive in it, which thrive, it sounds like maybe an overly positive word, but I don't mean it in a trite way. I just mean I don't want to just get by for the rest of my life with my grief. I want to do well, get through life well. And so tell me about that, about how you want to thrive and not just survive in it.
I think one of the things that I noticed, especially when I was, these last couple of years, is, different people that I've met and talked to about different things. Some of them have experienced similar things, and they live in a state of kind of the past. They haven't moved forward. Okay. And that was something that, it's a little bit fear in it, because some of these people I know well, and I don't ever want to get stuck in the past to where it affects, me living a daily life and being able to look forward to the future, whatever it holds,
Right.
I can't say that I have a moment where I was just like, okay, snap out of it, I didn't have one of those. But I do remember kind of thinking, if that love study, if the Bible's, what it's taught me on love, if that kind of love exists either in a future marital relationship or whatever, I don't want my past to keep me from experiencing it. I don't want to not love other people, even people, strangers, new people that I meet, whatever the case is. I don't want my past to keep me from having positive, good relationships like that.
That's excellent advice. What would you tell someone that feels like they are waiting or starting over a time period in their life?
I think the main thing is that you are not alone, and I think a lot of people suffer in silence. One of the reasons that I decided, after I typed all this and, am I going to do anything with it, I thought, well, if I can help somebody that's either been through, something similar, to help them not feel alone, then it would be worth it to me. And, just that there is, you don't have to suffer alone. I said, if you have nowhere else to start, just start praying.
Right.
It gives me so much comfort. Start with God, praying. He brought people into my life that I had no idea they experienced something similar. Sure. And, those types of people, they checked on me and they gave me advice and things that I would just... he just matches people up with the right, at the right time, I think. It's okay not to be okay.
Right.
And admit that you're struggling. I think there's still a stigma around mental health and
I agree.
Depression and grief, and people, especially Christians, think I have to be a happy Christian.
Right.
Okay, well, sometimes I'm not okay.
Right. And that is, sometimes I think people equate being a Christian and a child of God with if I admit I'm having trouble in my grief or having trouble at this juncture in my life, or I'm concerned about this crossroads in my life and what I do while I'm waiting for God to lead and show me the next step, we tend to act like we have to have it all together on the outside instead of admitting that, that we're struggling. When, if you read the scriptures, I don't know where we get that from exactly. Because, God lays it out there. There's not a Christian in the Bible who, from beginning to end, when you read their life, God includes all the struggles, all the problems, sins, those kinds of things. And yet he gives us the answers and he gives us the hope, which that is what I do. Yeah, that's what I'll say. You arrive at your conclusions with scripture and prayer. Yeah, I'm going to read some chapter titles. Of course, it's all based upon prescription, which is so fun. The prescription for waiting, patient fact and history, active ingredient waiting. When using this product, self-awareness may be uncomfortable. Dosage, take one day at a time. Questions regarding this prescription, consult God. And that's such a good example, because how many times when you get a prescription and you could go up and have a consult, but we don't, right? We're just like, no, I don't need that, and we go on.
Don't talk to the pharmacist at all.
No. And then you get home, you're like, oh, well, yeah, it does say that on here. And I think that's so important, because it is what we do with God. The answers are there, and we just walk away and live life. And then only when we have some hardship, we come running back and say, oh, wait, can you explain this to me or help me with this? Precautions, break up as needed. I loved your advice in that in general in our life relationships, not just a fiance or a boyfriend or whatever, but our relationships need to be based upon what God wants in our life. And then when using this prescription, how to use interactions, those are just some of the chapters. I love the do not take with bitterness. Take as prescribed. Facts and faith beat rumors every time. So wonderfully said. Risks. Results may cause a change in you. Love it. And then, of course, you even have in your appendix plan of salvation for us. So I think it's so well written. I think you did such a great job. And I think your attitude to say, I've come through this hard thing in my life, and I have this time period where I'm not sure what's around the corner. So instead of, God doesn't write it down on a piece of paper and hand it to us, does he? I wish he did. I can't tell you how many things in my life, even trying to do, I wish that was the case. He doesn't do that. And so for you to give us some really great advice from the scriptures on what to do in that time frame when you're at a crossroads and you're waiting on what God has for you or where he's taking you, or, and the attitudes to have, I just cannot say enough about what a great book this is, and the author. So
thank you.
I'm thankful for you coming and just sharing your heart with us. And this Erika's book, Prescription for Waiting, which is written out RX for Waiting, is it. I'm going to put the link to it in the description, but it can be found on Amazon, any of your regular bookstores you think, like Barnes & Noble, whether in-store or online. And you said it's on iTunes. Just, I encourage people to read it. And like I said, it isn't just a book about, if you're waiting for Mr. Right. It's not. I am a married person, and I got so much out of this from you telling us about your love study and making sure, whether in my marriage or with my family, or like you said, co-workers, just am I treating others right? Am I loving biblically? So what a great joy to read it and for you to share your time with us. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.